Hello, everyone. We're going to give people a minute or two to join. Thanks for joining us today. Now, if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to add them to the chat, making sure you're sending the question to everyone and not just host and panelists. We should have time towards the end for a Q&A. Now, as we wait, add where you are calling from in the chat. I'm calling from Montreal, as usual. Anyone else in Montreal? Anyone in the United States, Canada, Europe, elsewhere, Asia, Toronto? Amazing. Hi, Blake. Portland. Awesome. Toronto, North Carolina, Minnesota, UK. Oh, awesome. We got some Europe. Cool. Phoenix, Ohio, Puerto Rico. Amazing. Alrighty, so welcome to today's Tigerhall webinar. Our session features Nellie Wartoft, who is CEO of Tigerhall, and today's topic is proving the ROI of change management internally. Nellie, you can take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. And thank you everyone for joining. This topic I know is on many people's minds. And the inspiration for doing this as a webinar is that I have so many conversations around this one-on-one with people. And so many people that ask me about this. So I figured, why don't I just put all of this into a webinar session and do this more broadly so that more people can tune in and hear some of the work around ROI and change management. So as Julie mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Tigerhall, which is an AI change activation platform that activates change at very large scale for large organizations. So think end-to-end change management, change activation, getting the right people to do the right thing at the right time and driving adoption and getting all the data and measurement out of it. That's what we do. And in that work, I work with almost all of our incoming clients on their business cases to get the Tigerhall investment, which is where this topic comes up a lot, right? So my approach to this is very practical. It's very much based on what works in the real world and what do businesses actually accept. So when it comes to investing in change activation, change management, platforms around it, and just overall having a change function, what actually works with executives. So it's both from my work in building business cases, but then also as, of course, the chair of the ECLC, the Executive Council of Leading Change, and just meeting a ton of chief transformation officers and other transformation leaders in how they get to build these functions, right? So what I'm going to share today is a combined knowledge of everything that I see in those two worlds and very much real world based. Like I do these things every single day with some of the biggest companies in the world. So what actually works in 2026? And what we're going to cover is we're going to start with what not to do, because it's always great to begin with what should we not be doing. There are a lot of myths, I would say, about what actually works in the space. There are a lot of things that I see not working at all in 2026. So we're going to go through those. And then looking at some of what the best change teams do differently when it comes to this topic, like how do they actually go about proving ROI and being that team that gets that pull internally? Because we see quite a big difference. Like there are some change teams that are just like crickets and nobody ever calls them. And then there are others that are like, it's like getting into the hottest nightclub in New York. It's just impossible to get hold of the change management team. What is the difference between those two teams? We're going to talk about that. Then we're going to look at the 4 ROI angles and how you can combine them in different ways. And then, of course, how do we actually capture this ROI? Because it's one thing about thinking about the ROI and planning for it and building business cases, but then ongoing execution, you also need to capture all of these numbers on an ongoing basis. So that's what we'll go through. But starting off with what is it that we shouldn't do? And I find many times when I sit down with change and transformation leaders to work on this, there are some things that many are still doing that is very common, but actually is completely toothless in 2026. They don't work at all. And some of those include third-party research. I still see a lot of teams going like, oh, like the 70% of transformation initiatives fail. We all have heard that one way too many times. Nobody cares. Doesn't move the needle, hasn't moved a single budget. All the great research that is done around how change management increases likelihood of success and reaching objectives, or like change fatigue is at an all-time high. Like There's so much research about this, and the research is great, but it does not move budgets. It does not prove like why you actually need change management and why a company should invest in it. Because change management is a cost, it's not a revenue center, and we need to remember that. So getting that budget investment for whether it's an internal team or having staff augmentation or investing in platforms, whatever it is, that is not moving the budget. And one of the worst business cases I've seen is I was sitting down with this leader who was building a business case for expanding their change team. He was a team of one. So he was the head of change management, but like didn't have a team. And he was building the case for why he needed more resources, including teams and Tigerhall and so on. And the entire business case was around how do we move from level 5 to level 1? Like basically, how do we move up in our change management maturity? That is probably the worst business case I've ever seen. Like nobody cares about change management maturity and where you stand on a scale and your aspirations for where you want to go. So all of those things, not a good idea. I also still see a lot of teams tying it to people outcomes and focusing on things like employee productivity and morale and attrition. And it's just like, it reads very HR-ish. And the thing is, I mean, sorry to all my HR friends, but nobody really cares about HR in the grand scheme of things. So you kind of automatically put yourself in a bucket that is already low priority for most executives that have access to the resources that you need. Also not a good idea. And then I still see many thinking that adoption is ROI. And adoption is definitely one part of it because it's hard to do things without adoption, like especially if you're looking at AI or tech implementation or new processes that people need to adopt. Yes, you need adoption, but building your business case around adoption being the ROI, not a good idea. That is not what drives the share price of your organization. It's not whether people use something or they don't use something. So it can be a small part of it, but do not make it the whole thing. So these are still the top 3 that I see so many people still doing and building their ROI measures around. Not a great idea. So if we're not doing that, then what are we doing? And I'm sure that many are in situations where basically what you hear when you bring this whole idea of change management to the table, the response that you get is, well, they just have to do it. Who's getting that response? Maybe react with a heart if you're getting this response from your executives. Like they just have to do it, right? Yeah, tons of hearts. So this is the most common executive response is they just have to do it. If we tell them to change, they just have to change. They have a job, we pay their salary, this is what they need to do, so they just have to do it. This is the number one thing that we need to combat or address when it comes to how do we bring change management and talk about the ROI that it actually brings. But it's not only that, because the thing is, when you get this response that they just have to do it, the question then becomes like, even if they agree that, okay, they have to do it, the number one question that most change management teams fail to address is, why do we need you? Like, sure, we need adoption. Sure, we need all of those great things in the third-party research. And sure, we need all of that. But why do we need you? And I find that this is where many OCM teams fall down, is they struggle to prove, even if they can prove that, okay, change is important and we need to drive adoption, the critical thing is like, okay, what is the difference that a change management team makes? Because, yeah, they just have to do it and they will be doing it, but we have leaders who do it. Managers can run it. It's the leader's job to actually drive change in the organization. Another heart, if you hear your leader saying this, that leaders should be doing it. And if leaders tell people to do it, they just have to do it. Any executives that rely on their leaders, many as well. So this is many common, and I hear this especially in tech. A lot of the large tech companies, they're like, the driving change and transformation, that should just be ingrained in the culture and how we do things. So this is the other thing we need to think about, is how do we distinguish both we need change management, but also why do we need a change management practice and a team and like actually a function that runs this in addition to the leaders. So the number one thing, or actually almost the only thing that I find works nowadays, is boiling down to the speed of execution. And of course, cost, which we're going to talk about as well, the total cost of ownership, because I think many are missing that. But driving the speed of execution and framing change management as how do we go faster? And then tying your presence to the speed of a specific initiative or a specific transformation, that is what it tends to always come down to that works. Because you ask executives, do you want to move fast or slow? There's a 101% likelihood they will say they want to move fast. And then tying everything that you do to how do we do this faster? That is what ultimately moves the needle, is like the speed of execution. It's not about how people feel or like ultimate outcomes of initiatives and so on. It's about how fast can we move? That is what I find is the easiest way to prove like why someone needs change management. And a really good analogy that I use this a lot with executives, and it tends to work, like 9 out of 10 cases this actually works, is you tell them we're going to walk from LA to New York. Has anyone walked from LA to New York? I have not. So anyone who has done it, I have a friend who's walked from Mexico to Canada. So quite a few that have done that. But let's say we're going to walk from LA to New York. Okay, that is the transformation initiative. So you're bringing this to your executive, and then you tell them this is what they have to do. And then you tell them, you just have to do it. You just have to do it, right? You're based in LA. I'm telling you to walk to New York. You just have to do it. And that's when the executive is like, okay, I just have to like figure out how to walk to New York, right? Like, okay, great. So you, Mr. Executive or Mrs. Executive, you're going to walk to New York. This is your job and what you're going to do. Okay. And you just have to do it. Now, in this process of walking from LA to New York, would it help you if I gave you a map? Would that be of any help at all if you had a map when you started this journey? The executive usually goes, that'd be pretty good to actually have a map. If you're based in LA today, like I'm in LA as we speak, and I know that New York is that way, but I could start walking in that way and then get lost pretty quickly, right? And then you go, okay, and if I offered you a pair of shoes, so let's say you're currently in heels, you're currently wearing these high stiletto heels, and what if I gave you a pair of really, really good walking shoes? Would that help? Would that be easier for you to walk to New York in really great shoes than stiletto heels? Then the executive usually goes, that would actually be pretty helpful. And then what happens when you actually start walking? You tell the executive, so you've actually started this walk, you have the right shoes and you have the map. Now you suddenly notice that your boss is flying to New York. Your boss is on a plane and you have to walk. How do you address that? You still have to walk, but your boss or your peers or someone else in the organization is flying. Now you're confused. You didn't even know that flying was an option. You thought the whole point was to walk to New York. So some people are flying. Okay, how do we address that? And you start making it, but then you start seeing that out of your peers who you're walking with, some are now starting to work backwards. We're always almost in New York, but they've been getting lost, and they're now starting to walk backwards instead. What do we do with them? Who takes care of them? Who tells them that, hey, you're actually walking backwards and this is not the right direction? Who's going to tell them that? And you forgot that, oh, we need some water stations on the way. Who's going to administer these water stations? Who's going to make sure that we actually have the right fuel, that we know where to put those water stations, that we make sure that people know that there is a water station on the way, that people know this is on the map? And then suddenly you find out there are people actually still in LA that haven't even started walking. Now, what do we do with them? How do we know if it's a map problem, if it's a shoe problem, if it's a water station problem, or if these people should just be put on a PIP and maybe exited? Maybe they shouldn't even walk to New York in the beginning. Who are they? And then you also have some people that actually made the whole thing right. They walked in a straight line, but they ended up in Canada. And they think that they're in the right destination. They think they made it because they walked the right distance and everything was in a straight line and they followed it. They had the right shoes, but actually it was slightly off. So now they're in Canada and they are not in New York. What do we do with those people? this is usually the point where executives start going like, okay, yeah, like these things can happen, right? And some people will make it to New York without having any of this, for sure. Maybe 5-10% of your organization can actually start in LA, walk in stilettos all the way to New York and make it. But if you want 100% or even just 80% of people to actually make that journey to New York, you need all of these things. You need to give them a map. You need to give them shoes. You need to give them water stations. You need to guide them along the way, right? So the destination doesn't matter, but the arrival time, and I would say arrival quality, how many people get there, when do they get there, making sure they don't end up in Canada, that is what you're selling. So you're selling the arrival time and how many people get there. And these kind of analogies, like this is what I find is working with executives when it comes to talking about change management. And they can all relate to like, yeah, you couldn't just stand up today and start walking to New York, right? But if you had all of these things around you that guided you, that could help. And also having someone that addressed like, okay, what happens when executives are on a plane? I thought we were all walking. Who addresses that? Who tells the people are walking backwards? So this is something you can use and try it with your executives and then tell me if it worked or not. I use this one a lot. And I find that in 8, 9 out of 10 cases, it does resonate. And they start getting like, okay, it's actually just about how fast we can move. So getting to that speed of execution, that's what this one helps with. Okay, so then starting to look at what do the best change teams do differently. So we've aligned on, okay, it's about speed of execution. We have our analogy. What is it that we need to do? Then looking at the change teams that do this really well, there are 3 things primarily that these teams do that I find teams who constantly struggle with the whole like ROI, justifying their value, that kind of question, they don't do these three things at all. And the first one is that the teams who do this really well, it starts with picking the right projects to begin with and choosing where you get involved. I see many teams spreading themselves too thin, trying to work on everything and then trying to justify change management in the process of it. But it all comes down to what are the actual projects that you even spend any kind of change management resources on. And the number one thing here, to be able to prove ROI of OCM, and I'll call change management OCM in a lot of these cases, organizational change management. The number one thing is that OCM ROI cannot exist in isolation. And I think that's why the third-party research is so troublesome, because it kind of assumes that OCM has its own ROI and is in isolation. Whereas in reality, you always, in 10 out of 10 scenarios, you need to tie to an existing business case. And when you think of transformation initiatives and changes, there should always be a business case. I know there are organizations that still don't operate with business cases internally, and I don't know how they're operating, that's a different story. But in most organizations, there's always a business case. So if someone has made the decision to upgrade to S/4HANA or acquire a company or go and roll out Copilot to everyone, like whatever the initiative is, there's usually always a business case. I would say with AI, it's going to drop a little bit because so many organizations just go and spend on AI and then figure it out afterwards. And we see CFOs struggling with that now. But start with which are those projects that have very clear ROI and ideally binary ROI, right? So like some of my favorite initiatives are things like take time coding, for example. If people are time coding or not, it's very binary. And the business case is resource allocation, like X amount of savings and so on. So you want to have a business case there. You want to work on stuff that is important. Sometimes I see teams working on like culture change and breaking down silos and like not really critical to the business. So pick things that are super critical and that have that strong executive sponsorship to begin with, so that you don't have to go around and building the sponsorship, but it's already there. And then what they do is they design their entire intake process around these things, right? So the intake process is you need to have a business case. This needs to be defined up front and it needs to be critical. So they have certain things set in stone. One of the best transformation offices that we work with, they have this criteria that it needs to be top 10 priorities of the CEO. So if it's on the CEO's top 10 list, that's where they dedicate their resources and they go work on it. If it's not on the CEO's top 10, good luck to you, you're not going to get our resources. So think of how you design your intake process and making sure that you pick the right projects to begin with. That's the very foundation to even be able to prove ROI, and tying what you're doing, the speed of execution you're driving, to that outcome of the business case. And then what you want to do is you want to A/B test. This is something that is incredibly effective, and you only need to do this once or twice, maybe 3 times, and then you have internal case studies. And any kind of internal data, internal proof points, beat third-party research or external metrics 1,000% over. And this is your way to get those internal proof points. So the way you do this is you pick initiatives. So you have like 3 different initiatives. For each of those initiatives, you split the audience in half. And you only give change management treatment to half of them. And the other half gets nothing. They just have to do it. And the leaders will do it. So all of those arguments that you hear, right, they just have to do it. That's what the other 50% will do. And then you track. And when we look later at the ROI angles and like how you capture the ROI, you then look at whatever ROI angle makes sense for that initiative. And it can be a combination of them. That's what you track and then report black and white, people who got change management as part of the initiative and people who didn't. Teams have done this. There is no more argument. They just have to do this 1 or 2 or 3 times, and there is never, ever a single argument about change management ROI after this, because it's very clear. And they have 3 internal case studies that prove that, okay, this is the initiative where this is the audience that got it, the audience that didn't, and then they show exactly what was the difference in whether it's speed or adoption or cost avoidance or whatever it ties to that business case. And the important thing is when you have an audience, say you have 1,000 people, you want to split those 500s as like 500 equal. If you have those 1,000 people being 200 in manufacturing, 500 in sales, you want to make sure that you have 100 in manufacturing, 250 in sales, so that you have a very, very equal audience. And then what tends to happen, very interestingly, which tends to be a by effect of this, is that these people who are out here and not getting anything, when they see what their peers are getting, they're like, hello, like, why are they getting that and not me? So you start inadvertently getting a bit of internal demand as well. But doing this, and it can be in a small project as well, so it doesn't have to be a big, like, wide implementation, but just getting these internal proof points, because when you bring internal numbers to executives and say, like, this is what actually happened in that initiative that we ran last year, and this is the difference in ROI that we saw with OCM and without it. And if there's no difference, then then you shouldn't have a job, frankly, right? Like, then it proves that change management doesn't make a difference. So you want to do this and then see what is the actual difference. So, but it also puts it very black and white, and nobody can argue. And especially then when you tie it to the business case of that initiative. So definitely do this, even if you can do it with 1 small initiative this year. Just get started on your A/B testing. That's the only way you're going to get those strong numbers. And then the third thing that they do is that they're very, very practical and tactical in their value realization. So again, tying it back to the value realization of the initiative, be very specific about the behavior. This is where a lot more work is required upfront usually, and defining what are those behaviors. So it's not, again, like breaking down silos or embrace the new way of working or improve collaboration, but it's about how many sellers log next steps in the CRM within 24 hours, for example, and then tying that back to the business case. So you want the lagging indicator to be the thing that you report on. You do not report on how many sellers log next steps in the CRM within 24 hours. You do not report on adoption or behavior change. You report on the lagging indicator. And that's where the work comes up front, right? Is tying that specific behavior to what is that lagging indicator? How does that move the lagging indicator? And then report that in business language. So when you take the combination of these 3 things, you pick those right projects that have a very strong business case tied to it. You A/B test it, so you have audiences, and then you can go to your executives and say that, hey, we have these initiatives. When we had OCM involved, we saved $10 million more than when we didn't, or we gained $25 million. Like, you speak in dollars, or you speak in time, you speak in speed of execution language, You don't speak in behavior change, adoption metrics, and so on, but you have that tied to it. So very practical, and then reporting that back in business language. So those are three things that those teams do, and highly recommend to begin right away. Then looking at a few different angles when we look at ROI, and these are the four angles that I usually recommend to combine in some ways. So these are not meant to be mutually exclusive. It's not like you pick one of these and then you only measure ROI and justify it in that way. But it's usually a story where you weave in all of these four and you combine them. And those are risk, behavior change dependency, speed, and total cost of ownership, and combining them in different ways. So let's look at each of these four in detail and how exactly can you measure it. And also what I want to go through, which is important when you're picking these angles, is what type of initiatives and projects are you working on? Because different angles work differently well, or different levels of success for different types of initiatives. But before diving into the first one, some assumptions that we just have to accept that I don't know, I still see change management teams not coming around to just accepting that this is the fact, and they still try to change it. Unfortunately, most businesses don't care about people. That is just harsh reality. And especially now with AI, layoffs, everything, we just have to accept it. And I know, guys, like I'm a very people person. I care deeply about people and human beings. And it's one of the reasons that I love change. But I'm not going to change the world in this. This is how capitalism is structured. This is how our society is structured. This is how businesses operate. It is about share price and shareholder value and P&L. So just accept that as a fact and don't try and fight it. And then the second, I see so many going around like, oh, how do we explain what OCM does? How do we educate people in change management? How do we make sure executives know this? Like, stop trying. Nobody understands anyone else's job. And I think this is interesting when it comes to AI, especially, because if you look at what everyone thinks that, like, whose jobs should be automated, people always select the jobs they know the least about, because people don't understand other people's jobs. And I see this in like the venture capital startup circles that I operate into, right? Is that VCs always say that all of these corporate jobs should just be eliminated by AI, right? This is all can be done by AI. But actually, I think the number one job that should be eliminated by AI is VCs. Like, what are they doing? Like investment decisions, etc. Like all of that is very like intelligence AI. Just automate VCs, right? But no VC says that VCs should be replaced by AI. So just accept, like, people don't understand other people's jobs. They don't know the complexity that actually goes into something that they think can just be automated. So don't try and educate people on OCM and like try and like evangelize ADCAR across the organization. Like just stop it. And then the third thing to accept is just like people are very, very driven by fear and risk and minimizing cost out today far more than they are driven by growth and aspirations and so on. And this is actually the one that took me the longest time to accept, because what you hear and what people talk about, especially leaders and especially CEOs, they always go out and say that, you know, we're going to be the industry leading this and that and the number one and the most innovative. And like, it's all this big aspirational talk. But then when you look at the walk and what they actually do, it's all about cost savings and risk and fear in like 90% of the time. So if you come with a proposal around like, how can we minimize risk and cut costs and like play to their fear a bit more, that works so much better than trying to tell them that, hey, we can be this growth company and have these aspirations. And like, it just falls flat because people like it and they will say like, that's a great idea, but it will actually not open wallets the same way that fear does. So if we accept these, then it's going to be a lot easier than if we think that the world is a great place where people care about human beings and everyone should understand OCM and everyone wants to get better at OCM, because people just don't. So if we start with that third one and looking at risk. So the risk lens is basically, think of this as you can do it without OCM, not a problem. You don't need change management. The risk you're taking is X, Y, and Z. This is what you have to think about if you're going to go this say, walk from LA to New York, right? Like you can do that without any change management. The risk you're going to take is that 80% of your people are going to end up in Canada. And then 20% will walk into the Pacific and we'll never see them again. That's the risk that you're taking if you're taking that approach. So what you want to start thinking about here is what's at stake, and paint the worst case scenario on the wall and tell executives like this is what will actually happen. Like you can take this to extremes and make it very worst case, and then look at what is the cost of that worst case. And this kind of approach I see works really well when the change is about big customer impact. So anything that can go really wrong for customers, take this ROI framing as like the insurance policy. If you have supply chain changes, maybe product isn't being shipped, is not reaching shelves, is not reaching customers, anything around customer impact, really good to take this ROI framing. Anything around large upfront investments, this is an easy ROI case and measurement to make. And AI is great with this. I mean, organizations pour 20, 30, 40, 100, 200 million into these AI investments. Great one to tie an insurance policy to because you want that to go well. Acquisitions is another one. You acquire a company for $1 billion. Do you want that $1 billion to go down the drain? Most people do not. So you play to the fear of everything that can go wrong here. Also reputational risk. If you take pharma, for example, everything that is happening in clinical trial transformation right now, every single pharma organization is focused on how do we shorten the drug development timeline, and doing that with AI. Because if you don't, you're basically smoke. You're done as a company in that industry. So all of these major industry shifts that you need to keep up with, that plays so well into executives' fears of falling behind and losing their jobs and everything with it. So if you have any of these type of changes, then what you do is you scenario analysis. So you look at a few different scenarios and take like all these different failures, like what could happen. And all of this can be directionally correct. And that's another key point when we look at ROI. Like too many get hung up on like it needs to be exact and it needs to be the exact math. It doesn't have to. Like just directionally correct is enough for your storytelling. And this is storytelling. This is what you need. So if you think then of different scenarios, here 75, 50, 25 million, these are the investments or costs or like what could go down the drain. If you make an OCM investment of $1 million on a potential $75 million downside, that's a 1.3% risk premium, which is pretty decent. That's pretty good, right? Like you would be willing to take a 1.3% insurance policy if you're facing a potential $75 million risk. So framing this around like this is an insurance policy to ensure that we don't go completely the wrong way. And the reason you want to do a few different scenarios is that you don't want to get into the room and people start arguing that, oh, but this won't happen because we're doing this and so on. So you want to take into account that, yeah, if we're doing that, this could also go really well. And then you have like a few different ways of looking at it. But framing it as that insurance policy works well, especially when it's big customer impact, a lot of things on the line, big amounts of money going down right away. Then the second angle, and again, many of these can be used in combination, right? So it's ultimately how you build this entire ROI story with a mixture of these. This one is how much is actually depending of the entire change and transformation initiative, how much is depending on people changing the way they work. How much is depending on people doing new things, their own individual understanding, motivation, how much is depending on them doing it. And counting on everyone just like getting it from day one, that's a very naive approach. And usually that works also telling people like, do you really think that everyone will just get it? Like we can tell them once to walk from LA to New York and they'll just get it and go find a map and pick their shoes and start walking. Like some will, but that's a pretty naive approach. And many leaders are naive in this. So then you want to think about like how much of the value realization of this initiative depends on people changing the way they work. And then the way you can look at that is if no one is changing the way they work, how much value is realized? If everyone is changing, how much value is realized? And then you get percentages in between. And this is also an effective question to ask is there any way that people can do this wrong? Any option where they might choose not to do it, where they choose I don't want to time code. I don't want to put in stuff in the CRM. I'm not going to do this in the ERP. I'm going to do this on my hand notes instead. I'm not going to use whatever AI tool you're rolling out. Is that an option for people? And asking people that, usually executives are always like, yeah, that's an option. And then you're okay, so what are we going to do about that, right? Apart from they just have to do it. So if there is an option for people to do it wrong, and then what you want to look at is what are the downstream effects of if there is an option that people are doing it wrong or doing it not at all, what is that going to cost down the line? So this works really well where you have an initiative where the accuracy of data is very key. So everything CRM, ERP, anywhere where people need to input data, if that's paramount, then this is a good angle. If it relies on individuals, like it relies on their own motivation, execution, do they understand it? Anything that's changing to their workday, can someone choose not to do it? Do they actually have a choice in this? Then this angle is more powerful. And then also if there is a small change, like a small thing that they do wrong, what are the downstream effects on all of that? So here you can then frame change management as quality assurance. And that's basically what you stand for. You're the quality assurance to ensure that these small fuck ups in the beginning doesn't lead to major fuck ups later on. So if you look at the total project ROI and you're doing so, like if no one is changing how they work, like how much of the benefits will actually be realized? And then if everyone is changing, how much of the benefits will be realized? And that tells you what's the value of having change management involved. Because if you have an initiative, and there are initiatives which are not depending on people changing their work, right? Like you move from on-prem to cloud, like doesn't really impact, like people don't really have a choice. It's more of a hardware change. It's in the back end. You have a team involved with it. They execute it and it's done. You don't really need as much OCM in most cases from moving from on-prem to cloud. It's more of an IT change. But take AI on the flip side of that, massive change to mindsets, how people think and their work. You definitely need OCM. And then what you want to do is, again, linking this. So a lot of this is about linkage from the factor that you drive, which is usually that behavior change, to what is the business impact. And this works really well if you have changes like, take pricing. You have a new like pricing transformation, and we have one of those right now where like we have a client that is changing the way that they do pricing. Someone doing a little bit wrong in a pricing proposal can then lead to massively off margins and P&L impact, and you're losing money. Like it's a very, very big downstream effects. The same with underwriting. So many are changing their underwriting processes, and many times with AI as well. You screw up underwriting, you can be on the hook for millions and millions of dollars, right? So that quality assurance of, and you can again combine this with the risk one, the number one. If we combine this with risk, like what is that risk? Do we really want to take that risk that people send out the wrong pricing to our clients or underwrite something insane that we're then liable for hundreds of millions of dollars of payouts for? That's not a risk that we want to take. So quality assurance and the downstream effects, and then combining that with a risk approach, that's something that I've seen be very effective too. And then the third one, getting to speed. And just ask any executive, you can do this like slow and expensive or fast and cheap. What do you want to do? You always get fast and cheap in 99% of the cases. And here, what you want to look at is a couple of different angles to the speed and the speed that you're driving. And you want to look at what is every minute, hour, day, week, and month of not having this in place. What is that costing us? And what are we paying for today that we actually won't have to pay for once this change is done? And then once the change is implemented, what are the benefits that we will realize every single day or hour or minute or week or month when this is finally in place? So you want to look at both cost today and benefits in the future. So you view this as then the accelerator. How do we get that faster? This works really well if you have a change that is trying to change something where the current state is running on more temporary fixes. So you might be solving things today as an organization with consultants or staff augmentation and contractors, and you have all of these fix solutions of getting other people in from the outside to like temporarily run it or like outsource it. That tends to be very expensive. If you have scenarios where you have duplicate system running in parallel, If you're shifting ERPs, if you're doing M&A, you have like 2 of everything for a period of time. Everything that doubles up is twice as expensive. Very simple math. So that's really expensive to run. So you want to do that fast. That's where speed becomes such an important angle. And then the reason that this is, and why I call this the ultimate ROI is speed of execution, because in 99% of transformation, you don't actually realize the benefits until the transformation is done. Like very common sense, but as we always say, common sense is not very common, right? So you don't actually realize these benefits until it's done. So for most initiatives, the speed one works because there's never been an executive that doesn't want to get things done faster. And very simple math here. What you then look at is what's the cost of current state? And that includes your consultants, contractors, if you have any duplicate systems, all the manual workarounds, like everything that you're doing today just to maintain current state. And bonus is that many of the business cases for transformation initiatives is about lowering cost. So you have an immediate business case value realization of lowering cost once this is implemented, because many times it is about technology consolidation or kicking out consultants and these things and making it more streamlined and simpler. So what's your cost of the current state? What's the unrealized benefits while you're waiting? So what is not happening? Like, is it revenue that isn't captured? Is it customer is not able to buy certain things? Like, what is it that is not realized until this change is done? So if you add up here 400K cost of current state and 600K unrealized benefits, you get $1 million. And then you can project, actually, we can probably get this done 4 months faster if we help people with the map and the shoes and the water stations and actually guiding them through this properly. And that costs 500K as an OCM investment. You immediately have an 8x ROI, right? 500K investment to gain $4 million in value. This works really well in almost all initiatives. And it's for this third reason that most benefits tend to be locked until that change is done. So you can always use this, and again, in combination with the other ones. Then a fourth one that is very powerful, and I don't see as many doing this, but it's actually really, really powerful, especially if you have a central change management team that runs this enterprise-wide, is to look at the TCO, or the total cost of ownership. And the rationale behind this, and this is also a line you can steal and tell your executives, is that just because you're not doing change management doesn't mean that you won't have to do change management. Because many people think that if we don't have an OCM team, if we don't invest in change, then that's a saved cost. But actually what it many times ends up being is even more expensive. Because if you don't have an OCM team that does all of the maps and shoes and water stations and everything else, who will do that in their absence? Because there is no such thing as doing no change management at all. Someone will do that in the absence. And that would usually fall on the managers and leaders, as many executives think it should, like, oh, they should run that. But what's the price of having that be so decentralized across the organization? All the overhead coming from questions and confusion and errors that people are making, all of that duplication of effort, that is cost. So when we talk about cost savings, there's a lot of hidden shadow costs in running shadow OCM if you don't do it properly. So if you're a central team and you focus on doing OCM across org-wide initiatives, then this is something that I recommend you using, is positioning this as it's actually cost savings. Very effective when you have changes that have a very wide organizational impacts, like operating model, AI adoption, things that are impacting a big part of the org, or where you have that cross-org coordination that becomes a failure point. So if you have a lot of leadership changes, usually tied to M&A or to be anything, then this all falls apart, right? So it's very expensive to have that as a failure point. And then what we see many times is if you don't have that central transformation office, every BU kind of just does their own thing. And when you start adding all of that up, that's way more expensive than actually having a central change and transformation team that does this well. So what you want to do here is again, directionally correct shadow cost math. Because if you don't have a change management team, you don't do OCM, then you still have to spend time on leadership, like all the meetings, the one-to-one time, explaining this to the team. You usually have like chief of staff's comms, learning involved. It's all of this coordination overhead. And then people start doing their own stuff, like what we call like the DIY change assets, and people produce their own FAQs because people keep coming with questions when it's change happening. So you create your own FAQs, your own docs, and then you rework things. Like it's so many shadow costs that adds up. And if you do a directionally correct kind of like hourly estimate, and then times that by the average loaded cost of an employee hour at your organization, that's the price of no change management. And then on top of that, you have all these different business units that bring in their own maybe staff aug or consultants like to help them through this. And then you suddenly have a price for what all of this costs. So what you can do then is position the investment in OCM and the ROI is actually cost savings. And coming back to those assumptions that we always want to hold true, executives respond way better to risk and fear and cost savings than trying to do better OCM or maturing their change management, which nobody cares about. So there's always a cost to change management, whether it shows up as change management or not. And this is what is important to point out, that there is this very large shadow cost involved, even if they think they're saving money on having no change management. It usually ends up becoming way more expensive. So those are the four. And again, highly recommend to combine these and have, like, depending on your initiative, what works, what doesn't work, like combining them. You want it to be safer, better, faster, cheaper. That's the language that you want to speak. And then tying it to whatever fits your initiative. You lead with one and then the other feed in. So many times what I see working is you pick one as the lead. So you frame it as that insurance policy or the quality assurance or the reduction in cost. Like you lead with one and then you pick one or two that follow. So kind of like a side benefit. So this is the angle. And then these are the other benefits that you also get from having OCM. So those tend to work well. Then what you want to do is, of course, capturing this ROI. Because it's one thing to tell the story up front and actually get the, like, okay, this is something that we want to invest in. But then how do you capture the data? And especially if we come back to this, the A/B testing with having two different audiences, how do you ongoingly capture this? So a few things here, and you want to build this into the entire end-to-end timeline of execution. So one is that intake process. So we spoke about how you design your intake process, and you want to capture baseline metrics. And I know many are struggling to get baseline metrics. I would be go very, very hard on getting those baseline metrics and have that as part of your intake process. That no baseline metric to improve, no OCM, nothing. That's one of your hard criteria, because you need to be able to capture where you are today, what those current costs look like, what's the current speed before you can start changing it, because you cannot improve what you don't measure. And then spend more time upfront to define those outcome metrics together with like the initiative owner, together with finance, like what are the outcomes we're actually driving? And again, being super specific. It's not about breaking down silos or changing the ways of working. It's about what exactly are we expecting different people to do at what time? And then that's the only way that you can then track those signals in the flow of work to actually see from systems how many are doing this process the right way, how many are pressing this button within this amount of time. Like you can start tracking this. Any change that has technology involved, which is frankly most changes to some degree, whether it's a process change or anything else, they would capture these different signals. So you want to track them. And then when you report to the steerco, you just report on that velocity versus the business case. So taking that baseline, and then are you landing that value faster than you planned? So getting back to that speed of execution, that's the only language that you speak. So how we do this in practice, if we look at that definition of the behaviors, because this is so critical, and so many organizations still miss this. We have so many that come to us and say, hey, we want to drive AI adoption. And we go, that's great. What does that mean? And they have no clue. Have not thought about what does AI adoption actually mean. And what we mean by defining it is looking at who needs to do what, how often, by what timeline, like what are the actual things that they need to do. So you spend a little bit more time up front here thinking about what are we trying to change here? What is the outcome? And then you define this to then be able to track the shifts between different personas. So if you want to track in the AI example, the people who haven't started, like they're not doing anything in AI, for example, then you have a group that is maybe exploring, starting to use some of the horizontal personal productivity tools, Copilot, and so forth. And then you have a group called AI practitioners, where you've defined the behaviors as they use it in their core workflows, they're building prompts and they're doing agents and so on. They've redesigned the processes. So you define what do these different personas look like, and it will be way more than 3 usually, but to give a simple example. And then looking at how does the business case tie to how many of the people are actually in these different personas. So then you can track over time and see how are you moving from having 10 people being AI practitioners to 10,000 people being AI practitioners. What does that mean for that business case? So again, coming back to the original business case. And if you use a change activation platform like a Tigerhall, what this looks like, to give you an example, is this, where you can then actually see, so this tracks across systems, across tools that you integrate with, like everything to see what are people doing. And then you have these behaviors defined as stakeholder groups. And then here you can actually go in and see over time. So in this example with AI adoption, you can then see how many have not started at all. And is that line going down over time? How many are moving into that practitioner layer? Is that line going up over time? How are people moving between these different groups? So the people who have moved from like not started to then becoming explorers. Who has made that journey? Also good source to find real champions, not just leader nominated champions, but seeing who has actually made that shift. So you can track that. And then also breaking down by audience, like where do these different people sit? Are we seeing higher AI adoption in middle managers in EMEA sales? We see lower in the BPO in India, for example, so that you know where to dedicate your time and effort as well. So this is an example of how you want to define the personas to then be able to track those behavior shifts in real time. So this is all real time on a daily basis. You can then track back to that business case. But it does come down to that defining what do we actually want. And I find many organizations still being pretty poor at defining what are we actually looking for people to do. But just as simple as this one, many are using who hasn't started, who's exploring, who's a practitioner, and then tying that back to the use case. And these could be many different types of behaviors, right? This could also be take a CRM, like how many are inputting that right data. If we look at that quality assurance angle, how many are following the process, how many have started that process, how many have shifted to the system instead of doing it on pen and paper. So this is super flexible to be any kind of behavior, but you want to track those shifts. And then make a lot of friends in finance so that you have the baseline numbers on price. And then what you can then see is every week, what is the cost of gaining a week? So again, always coming back to speed of execution, biggest impact of OCM. And you can then track if every week is costing 250K, if you're then 2 weeks ahead of plan or 1 week ahead of plan, you know exactly what is the live ROI and benefits on that. So this is how you want to then do like a burn-up chart of comparing what was the planned, the projected timeline of driving, say, adoption or whatever the change is, and then how far ahead of plan are you and what does that result in dollar. So you want to make a lot of friends in finance. And this is something, again, that not enough change and transformation teams are close to, that I would like to see more of them being closer to. And that's both to get those baselines at intake. If you look at any of those angles, like total cost of ownership or risk and like all of those things around the business case, what are those baseline numbers and what are the numbers in the business case? And then having them sign off on that cost per week and then being able to get those numbers. Sometimes you can get on a weekly basis. Many of these numbers, they do track weekly, but at least monthly. So every month end, you get the numbers directly from finance to then input in your business case model and how you build the ROI. So finance is a critical component in this. And again, OCM never exists in isolation, right? It's always tied to a business case that is in dollars. And that's why finance are critical to get involved too. And then these chain reactions. So what you report is this, the business case, the revenue, capital allocation, the value realization. What you do on a day-to-day basis as change practitioners is you change behavior. But that behavior always does have a downstream effect. So this is, again, where I recommend spending a little bit of time figuring out what are those links. And if you drive change, if we take the CRM example again, that sellers log correct data within 24 hours, what is the output of them doing that behavior? And then if they keep doing that behavior, what kind of capability does that build for the organization? And if you have that capability, what does that result in as a business case? So usually what I see is it tends to be 3 steps, sometimes 4, between behavior change and business case. And you want to make sure that this is mapped and that you have this chain reaction so that you can report on these numbers. Because then what you can do is every change that you have here, and again, like if you track it in a way like this, where you can then see how many people are practicing that exact behavior, every single movement on this line then builds up to $1 in point C or D. So you have that direct dollar correlation that you have throughout. So ultimately, a few mindset shifts to all of this, like starting with fewer, better projects, focusing on what do you take on, what do you lend your valuable OCM resources to. There's a little bit more work up front. So the teams who do this really well, they spend way more time on defining the behaviors, what are the outcomes, getting those baseline numbers, more of the work there. And they're able to do this because they don't spend their time on 57 different projects at the same time. They focus on key projects, and then they do that work up front. And then being directionally correct is completely fine. I see many not doing any of this because they find that, I cannot get the exact number. Completely fine, just be directionally correct. I met a chief transformation officer who tracked this by she had everyone draw a line on their desk. I put a paper on the desk and they draw their line every time they did something. And she just walked around between the desks and looked at the number of lines every week. And that was her directionally correct measurement of the change that was taking place. So it doesn't have to be super sophisticated, but having a directionally correct story is 100 times more powerful than coming and talking about third-party research or maturing your OCM function that nobody cares about. So some key takeaways as we wrap. Speed of execution tends to be the only thing that executives actually buy. So tying your team's presence to that speed of execution, and ideally doing that through the A/B testing so that you have those internal numbers, half with OCM, half without, and then that delta is what you report internally. Picking the right projects and then framing it with all of these different angles. So you have those 4 different angles, use them, combine them, pick one that you lead with, and then from there, get number 2 and 3, and you can have other angles coming into it, but you have this key one that you frame it around. If you do these 4 things, I promise you that you will have an absolute stellar OCM team that keeps getting investment and funding and resources and pull and demand internally. I know one who's done all of this super well. Her team, not that headcount is a measure of success, but it's a little bit of a proxy. She has 75 people in her OCM team on a team of 5,000 people, an organization of 5,000 people. So, and that's because they do this extremely well and nobody's questioning their worth. Nobody's asking, why do we need OCM? Nobody's questioning what's the ROI of doing this whole thing. It's just obvious to everyone in the organization. And that's what you want to get to, where people don't question it. It's just obvious. So anything that you want to talk through, get more help with this, as I mentioned, I sit with change and transformation leaders about this every single day. I'm more than happy to help you and dive into your specific initiatives and how you can shape it. So feel free to email me anytime, view me as your resource, and feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to set up one-to-one time as well. And I know that we're very close on time. I'm not sure, Julie, if we have time for maybe one question, and I apologize for running over, not having as much Q&A time. But my inbox is, you're always on Q&A, so feel free to email me with any questions that you have, and I answer every email that I get. So please reach out.
Great. So I'll select one question then. It's from Dana. Dana asks, how do you get buy-in to do the A/B testing when it could risk the success of the project?
That's very interesting. So if someone says to them that it could risk the success of the project, then they already value OCM in a way, because then they think it's risky to not get OCM. So the buy-in then, like usually, like, or buy-in comes from like when you have executives that think that they should just do it, right? Or we don't need OCM, then okay, let me just do it with half, and you can see the difference black and white. But if someone says it's a big risk to the project if we don't have OCM, that's a pretty good place to start already. And then you usually need less buy-in for it. But again, like picking smaller projects can work. Starting with something that is more defined. Maybe don't pick the like absolute biggest, most important project in the organization to begin with, but find that one executive with a smaller initiative and then do it with them. So, and then that internal demand will build automatically. Good question. Exactly. Try OCM at least half of the audience. Super. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending time. Feel free to reach out at any time, and I will see more of you soon. Thank you for being here.